When my son-in-law pushed me overboard during the family cruise, I thought I would die in the black water below. What he did not know was that I survived, and when I returned, I carried more than bruises. I carried a plan that would strip him and my daughter of everything they thought they'd stolen. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am Charles Whitman, 74 years old, and I have spent most of my life building things meant to last. Some men chase fast cars or big titles. I built homes. Foundations, walls, roofs, shelters for families. I was a contractor for almost 50 years, and in that time I built over 100 houses. But none of them ever meant as much as the one where I raised my daughter, Julia, with my late wife, Margaret. My late wife was the heart of that family. She had a way of turning ordinary moments into memories. Saturday morning smelled like her pancakes and sounded like the radio humming old Frank Sinatra tunes. On summer nights, she would drag lawn chairs into the driveway just so we could watch thunderstorms roll in. She was light, laughter, and stubborn kindness wrapped into one. 5 years ago, cancer took her. And with her went the noise that made life worth living. The house fell quiet. The kitchen table seemed too large. The old clock ticked louder. Even my own footsteps echoed as if reminding me I was walking alone. The only thing that kept me moving was a promise. On Margaret's last night, I held her hand, thinner than it had ever been, and whispered, "I'll look after Julia." She smiled, weak but certain, and nodded. That was the last thing she ever asked of me. Julia is our only daughter. She was always the bright one, the kind of girl who won spelling bees in grade school and science fairs in high school. Margaret used to say Julia's laughter sounded like glass wind chimes. After her mother's passing, she came back home often. We cooked together, even if it was just heating soup. She helped me box up Margaret's clothes, pausing every so often to press her face into the fabric. Once, she even stayed the night, curling up on the couch like she had as a teenager after breakups or bad exams. But slowly, the calls grew fewer. The visits, shorter. And then came Daniel. Daniel Mercer, my son-in-law, walked into our lives wearing polished shoes and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He made his living in investments, though he talked more about what things were worth than what they meant. From the very start, he looked at me like a man inspecting a cracked foundation, something he'd have to replace eventually. At first, I tried. For Julia's sake, I laughed at his stories about market trends, even when they made no sense to me. I invited him to fish with me on the lake, but he declined, saying he didn't see the point of sitting still for hours. He preferred golf, expensive restaurants, and anything that could be photographed for social media. Small things started to sting. One Christmas, he gave me a book about decluttering, with a note that read, "Time to simplify." Another time, he suggested I downsize into a condo closer to town, so Julia and Clara could use the family house more efficiently. Efficiently, as if the walls where Margaret and I raised our daughter were nothing but square footage on a spreadsheet. Julia didn't correct him. If anything, she started using his words. "Dad, Daniel thinks you'd be more comfortable with less space. Dad, Daniel says the taxes must be a burden." But I stayed quiet. I told myself she was just trying to keep peace. And besides, Clara, their little girl, my granddaughter, still ran into my arms every time she saw me. She is 8 now, with freckles across her nose and a laugh that reminds me of Margaret's. She likes to sit in my lap while I tell her stories about the houses I built, asking questions about the tools and pretending she'll be a builder one day too. For her, I endured Daniel's smirks and Julia's silences. So when Julia called and said, "Dad, we want to take a family cruise, all of us together," I agreed. I imagined long evenings with Clara, watching the sunset from the deck. Maybe even a chance to remind Julia of who she used to be, before Daniel's voice started filling her sentences. I had no idea the cruise was not meant to bring us closer. The ship gleamed like a floating city, all polished brass railings and glass chandeliers. Strangers bustled about with drinks in hand, children darted across the deck, and music poured from hidden speakers. Everyone else seemed to arrive with excitement. I arrived with unease. Julia hugged me quickly at the gangway, but even in that small gesture I felt her distance. Daniel's arm wrapped around her shoulders as if sealing her off. Clara ran to me, of course, squealing, "Grandpa," and clinging to my waist. For a moment, my heart lifted. But Daniel cleared his throat and said, "Clara, don't wear your grandpa out. He's not as strong as he used to be." That set the tone. At dinner the first night, Julia and Daniel sat side by side, whispering and checking their phones while I tried to keep Clara entertained with stories. The waiter offered me wine, and Daniel interrupted, "Better stick to water. He's on medication." His words made the table chuckle, even Julia, though I never found it funny. Everywhere I turned, I felt like luggage they'd brought along reluctantly. During excursions, Julia and Daniel wandered ahead, leaving me trailing behind with Clara, who kept tugging my hand toward gift shops while they pretended not to notice. At the pool, Daniel stretched out on a lounge chair, sunglasses flashing, while Julia snapped photos for social media. In every picture, they angled themselves so I was out of frame. One afternoon, I overheard Daniel talking to another passenger. "This trip? Just family obligations. We're managing some transitions at home. You know how it is with older relatives, easier when things are settled sooner rather than later." His tone was casual, but his eyes slid toward me when he spoke. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on the balcony of my cabin, watching the moon lay a silver path across the water. Something was wrong, I could feel it in my bones. Not just wrong in the way families drift apart, but wrong in the way predators circle their prey. Clara knocked on my cabin door the next morning, asking if I wanted to play cards before breakfast. Julia's voice called her back sharply, as if she didn't want us alone together. When I joined them at the buffet, Daniel greeted me with a smile that looked practiced, his hand resting heavy on my shoulder. "You know, Charles," he said, "life gets complicated the longer it stretches. Sometimes, maybe it's better to let go sooner rather than later." He said it as if it were philosophy. But the way his fingers pressed into my shoulder told me it was something else. And in that moment, staring at him across a table of scrambled eggs and fruit, I realized, this cruise wasn't a family vacation. It was an ending, and I was the one they'd chosen to end. The night it happened was calm, too calm. The Caribbean stretched out like a sheet of black glass, the stars above so sharp they looked close enough to touch. The ship glided forward with a hum so steady it almost felt alive, like some great beast carrying us toward an unknown shore. Passengers filled the lounges, their laughter spilling out of open doors along with piano music and the clink of glasses. A band played somewhere above, faint trumpet notes rising and falling like a heartbeat. But out on the lower deck where I found myself wandering, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that made every sound echo, the creak of the railing, the distant slap of water against metal, even my own breathing. I hadn't meant to leave the others so soon. Dinner had been another quiet battlefield. Julia spoke more to Daniel than to me, nodding when he explained how estate planning was essential, how older folks sometimes can't see what's best. Clara had tried to tell me about a dolphin show she wanted to see, but Julia shushed her, saying, "Grandpa's tired." So I excused myself. Said I wanted air. Truthfully, I wanted space, to collect myself before the bitterness I felt turned into words I couldn't take back. The deck lights painted everything in gold and shadow. I leaned on the railing, breathing in the salt air. For a few minutes, I let the ocean steady me. Out there, no one cared about property, wills, or who was a burden. The water didn't judge. That's when I heard footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. A man who knew exactly where he was going. Beautiful night, isn't it? Daniel's voice slid out of the darkness before he did. He wore that same pressed shirt from dinner, sleeves rolled, a drink in one hand. His smile caught the light, white, practiced, empty. "Yes," I said, my eyes fixed on the horizon. He came to stand beside me, too close. His cologne cut through the salt air. "You know, Charles, I've been thinking a lot on this trip. About what's best for Julia. For Clara." My hands tightened on the railing. "They're my family too." "Of course they are." He took a slow sip, then set his glass carefully on the deck as if freeing both hands for something else. "But you must see how difficult it's been. The house, the finances, all the responsibility of, well, looking after you." "I never asked to be looked after," I said. His smile thinned. "That's exactly the problem. You don't see it. You think you're still the man who built everything. But Julia needs someone who can move forward, not someone clinging to the past." I turned to face him then. For a moment, the deck lights caught his eyes, and I saw not a son-in-law, but a man weighing his options. Calculating. "You want the house," I said quietly. "I want peace," he corrected. "For Julia. For Clara. For everyone." The way he said it made my stomach turn. I knew then what he meant. The silence stretched. Only the ocean moved, restless against the ship's hull. Daniel shifted closer. I could feel the heat of his shoulder brushing mine, his hand tightening on the rail as if testing his grip. "Accidents happen on cruises," he murmured. "People get careless. Slip. No one ever knows why. And then it happened. The shove was sudden, hard, and merciless. His palm struck between my shoulders with enough force to knock the air out of me. My body pitched forward, the railing a blur beneath my hands. I managed a gasp, half breath, half cry, before the world flipped upside down and the black water swallowed me whole. The shock was brutal. The ocean hit like stone, driving every ounce of air from my chest. Salt burned my throat. Darkness pressed in from all sides, endless and heavy. For a heartbeat, I couldn't tell up from down. My arms flailed, useless against the cold weight pulling me deeper. Above, the ship sailed on. Its lights grew smaller, dimmer. No one saw. No one heard. Except Daniel. He knew. He had seen. And he had already turned away. The ocean closed over me like a fist. Salt clawed at my eyes, my throat. I kicked hard, but the weight of my clothes dragged me downward, twisting me in the blackness. Every instinct screamed to breathe, but opening my mouth would mean death. My chest convulsed. I clawed upward, or what I thought was upward, only to feel my arms sliced through nothing but more cold. And then the memories began. First came Margaret. I saw her in our kitchen, hair pulled back, flower on her cheek, humming Sinatra while rolling out pie dough. Her laugh bubbled through the water, clear and cruel, because I knew I would never hear it again. I reached for her, my hand stretching into the void, but she faded into shadow. Then Julia. A little girl again, standing in the yard with scraped knees, holding out a toy hammer and saying, "Build me a treehouse, Daddy." The way her eyes had once lit up just for me, before another man's voice started shaping her thoughts. That image twisted into her adult face, cold and distant at the dinner table, repeating Daniel's words, burden, responsibility, easier. The water pressed tighter around me. My lungs burned, my body spasmed. I started to let go. And then, Clara. My granddaughter's small arms around my neck, her freckles glowing in the sunlight as she whispered, "Grandpa, promise you'll always be here." Her voice was not memory but command. A child's plea turned into a lifeline. Something inside me roared. No. Not like this. Not on Daniel's terms. I kicked again, harder, forcing my heavy legs to fight the pull. My arms pumped, slicing upward until my shoulders screamed. The water around me seemed endless, but I kept moving, every muscle screaming Clara's name. My head broke the surface with a ragged gasp that tore at my throat. I coughed, choked, swallowed more salt, but I was alive. The ship was a distant blur of light now, too far to hear me scream. My arms flailed against the waves, fighting to keep my head above water. Help! My voice cracked, useless against the vast night. The sea swallowed it whole. But I kept kicking. Kept breathing. Kept refusing to let Daniel's push be my end. Minutes dragged into hours. My body grew heavy, each stroke slower than the last. The horizon was nothing but black. My vision blurred. But just as the last of my strength slipped away, a dim light appeared across the waves, faint, flickering, moving closer. A boat. At first, I thought it was another trick of my failing mind, some mirage thrown up by the sea to taunt me before I slipped under for good. But then the light bobbed, brightened, swayed with movement that wasn't mine. Real. Solid. Hope. My arms felt like lead, but I forced them forward, slapping against the water in uneven strokes. My throat burned raw, every breath slicing like glass, yet I dragged air deep enough to shout. What came out wasn't a call but a broken groan, half-drowned and pitiful. Still, I tried again. Again. Clara's face floated before me, and her small voice whispered, "Promise you'll always be here." The light grew larger. Voices rose, quick and sharp, carrying across the waves in a language I couldn't understand. My vision blurred, but I caught glimpses of shadows leaning over the side of the boat, pointing, calling out. Then hands, real, rough, human hands, closed around my arms. They gripped me hard enough to bruise, tugging me upward as I kicked weakly, more reflex than effort. The water resisted, sucking at me, but the hands pulled harder, and suddenly I was heaved onto the deck, collapsing onto wet wood with a thud that rattled my bones. The sea slipped away beneath me. The night sky, endless and sharp with stars, opened above. My chest convulsed, heaving, until I coughed violently, salt water, bile, the bitter sting of the ocean pouring out of me. I kept coughing until the taste of salt gave way to the metallic tang of blood, until the world spun and steadied again. Alive. By some miracle, bruised, broken, but alive. The fishermen shouted to each other, their words fast and strange to my ears. One draped a blanket across my shoulders, another pressed a canteen to my lips. Water spilled down my chin as I tried to swallow, but even that pain felt holy, proof that I still had a body, still had breath. I lay there trembling, staring at the stars above, and for a moment all I felt was disbelief. I should have been gone. The shove, the fall, the sea pressing me under, Daniel had written my ending with his hands. And yet here I was, dragging air into lungs that refused to quit. And then the disbelief curdled. It hardened. Because survival was no longer just chance. It was purpose. Daniel thought he had erased me with one push. He thought Julia would weep briefly, collect the inheritance, and then let him reshape my life's work into his own triumph. He thought my story ended in the water. But he was wrong. As I lay on that deck, chest heaving, every nerve still aflame with the memory of drowning, a single thought cut through me like steel: Daniel had given me the only weapon I would ever need. Proof. Proof of what he was, of what he was capable of. I had clawed my way back from the grave he dug for me. And now, I would dig one for him, not in earth, not in water, but in the place where men like him never expect to be buried. In court. In truth. In the eyes of his own daughter and child. I closed my eyes against the stars, the blanket clinging damp to my skin, and let the thought burn into me like a brand. He tried to kill me, but he failed. And I would make him pay. The fisherman brought me to port just before dawn. My body was a wreck, skin raw from salt, muscles screaming from the fight, ribs sore where Daniel's shove had landed. They half carried me into a small clinic, where the sterile white lights felt harsher than the sea itself. A doctor, young enough to be my grandson, examined me with brisk efficiency. He pressed along my ribs until I winced, shone a light into my eyes, listened to my ragged breathing. "You've got bruised ribs," he said. "Mild hypothermia. Exhaustion. But you're lucky, sir. Another hour in that water and we'd be having a very different conversation." Lucky. That word kept circling me like a vulture. Was it luck to be thrown away by your own family? To wake up alive, knowing the hands that should have helped had tried to end you? The doctor spoke of rest, of fluids, of antibiotics to prevent pneumonia. I nodded at the instructions, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Daniel's palm strike between my shoulders, heard his low voice, "Accidents happen on cruises," and saw Julia's silence at the dinner table. I asked for a private room. The nurses obliged, perhaps mistaking my request for pride. In truth, I needed silence. I needed space to think. I lay in that hospital bed, for dripping beside me, heart monitor ticking softly, and let my thoughts arrange themselves like blueprints. I'd been a builder my entire life. I knew how to start with a plan, even when all you had were broken pieces. Piece 1, Survival. I was alive, and Daniel didn't know it yet. That was power. Piece 2, Evidence. No one had seen the push, but I knew him. I knew his greed, his ambition, his careless arrogance. Somewhere there would be a trail, the life insurance he insisted Julia take out, the way he spoke of transitions, the witnesses who saw him follow me to the deck. Men like Daniel always left fingerprints, even when they thought they were wearing gloves. Piece 3, Timing. If I rushed, Julia would protect him. She was already under his spell. But if I waited, if I planned carefully, I could make sure the truth was undeniable, legal, permanent, impossible to twist. I stared at the ceiling tiles, pale and plain, and imagined them as a chessboard. Daniel thought he'd already won the game. He had no idea I was still on the board. When the nurse checked on me that night, she asked if I wanted something for sleep. I shook my head. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. I needed every hour, every thought, every ounce of resolve. Because the man who pushed me into the sea thought I would drown. Instead, I was going to rise, and pull him under. 3 days after the rescue, the doctors cleared me to leave the hospital. My ribs were still tender, my throat burned when I spoke too long, but I told them I could manage. They handed me a packet of discharge papers, prescriptions, and a polite smile that said, "You're lucky to be alive." I didn't feel lucky. I felt unfinished. The morning air stung my skin as I stepped outside, clutching the manila folder of medical records like it was gold. Every note about my bruised ribs, every mention of possible blunt force trauma, was a seed I could plant later. Evidence. Proof that I hadn't just fallen, that something violent had happened to me. I called my lawyer, Mr. Jennings, a man I'd known for 30 years, first when he drew up the deed to my house, later when Margaret and I arranged our wills. His voice on the phone was steady, measured. "Charles," he said, "you sound like you've been through hell. Come in tomorrow morning. We'll talk." The next day, I sat across from him in his oak-paneled office, the air faint with the scent of old books and ink. Jennings leaned forward, glasses perched low on his nose. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the cruise, about Daniel's words, "Accidents happen," about the shove, the fall, the sea. I described waking up in the fishing boat, the hospital, the bruises that still ached when I breathed. My voice broke once when I said Julia's name, when I admitted she had stood by silently while her husband carved me out of her life. Jennings didn't interrupt. He just listened, his pen scratching steadily across a yellow pad. When I finished, he set the pen down and said, "Charles, if what you're telling me is true, we need to be methodical. This isn't just family tension anymore. It's attempted murder. But we can't rush. We need evidence, documentation, and we need to make sure Daniel doesn't suspect a thing." He listed the steps. The first step, keep every medical record. Photograph the bruises daily. Show the progression. The second step, document every interaction with Julia and Daniel from this moment forward. Dates, times, words spoken. Even small things can build a case. The third step, secure the estate. Rewrite the will, immediately, removing Julia and Daniel. If anything happened to me again, they would gain nothing. I nodded, my jaw tight. Every step was another nail in Daniel's coffin, hammered not with anger but with precision. That night, back home in my quiet house, I stood before the bathroom mirror, lifting my shirt to study the purple-black smudges blooming across my ribs. I took photographs, one from the front, one from the side, grimacing as the flash lit the room. Each picture felt like a shield. Proof. Protection. I sat at my desk afterward, the same desk where Margaret once wrote grocery lists and Julia once did her homework. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote the date at the top. Then I began. April 14th. Dinner on cruise. Daniel's words, "Sometimes it's better to let go sooner." Later that night, shove, fall into water. Rescued by fishermen. The words steadied me. They gave form to the chaos. Page by page, line by line, I was building something again, not a house this time, but a fortress. And somewhere deep inside, a grim satisfaction stirred. Daniel had tried to erase me quietly, as if I were a loose end to be tied up. But I was going to erase him loudly, legally, permanently. The will had once been an act of love. Margaret and I drafted it together, sitting at this very desk with Jennings 30 years ago. We left everything to Julia then, the house, the land, the savings, because that's what parents do. They pass down what they built. Now, it felt like surgery. Necessary, but brutal. Jennings read the new document aloud, his voice steady but softer than usual, as if he understood the wound I was cutting open. To my granddaughter, Clara Mercer, I leave the family home, the land upon which it stands, and all belongings therein. To the charitable foundation established in Margaret's name, I leave the remainder of my estate, financial and personal. Julia's name was nowhere. Daniel's name had never been there to begin with, and now it never would. Jennings placed the papers before me. "Charles, once you sign, this is binding." "Are you certain?" I stared at the page. I saw Margaret's handwriting on old grocery lists. I saw Julia as a little girl in pigtails, begging me to push her higher on the swing. I saw Clara, innocent, her small hands always searching for mine. Yes, it hurt. It felt like cutting my own heart in two. But betrayal has a way of cauterizing wounds before they can bleed you dry. I signed. My hand shook, but my signature was clear. Jennings gathered the papers and slipped them into a folder. "It's done. They can't touch a cent, a spoon, or a square of land." I exhaled, long and heavy, like I'd been holding my breath since the shove. But revenge requires more than paper. It needs voices. Proof. The next day, I tracked down the fishermen who had pulled me from the sea. It wasn't difficult, their small harbor was only an hour from the hospital. The boat was there, paint chipped, nets drying in the sun. The men greeted me with surprise and cautious warmth, speaking in broken English, their gestures filling the gaps. Through translation apps and halting words, I pieced their story together. They had seen me thrashing in the dark, had shouted, had pulled me from the waves, coughing and half dead. One even held up his phone, showing a blurry picture he'd taken that night, me sprawled on the deck, soaked, pale, wrapped in their blanket. I felt my throat tighten. Proof. More than words, more than memory, an image, time-stamped, undeniable. "Come with me," I said, slowly, carefully. I pointed toward the town where Jennings's office stood. "Lawyer. Very important." They exchanged looks, then nodded. These were men of the sea, men who understood debts of survival. They piled into an old truck, nets still in the back, and followed me into town. Jennings greeted us with raised brows, but once the story unfolded, he leaned forward, pen flying across his pad. He asked questions, slow and precise, each answer filling the gaps of the night. The photo was copied, printed, sealed into an envelope. Their signatures went on to sworn statements, notarized before the ink could dry. When the fisherman left, Jennings looked at me with something like admiration. "Charles, this isn't just a family squabble anymore. With these records, with your medical files, with these witnesses, you've got the foundation of a case. A strong one." Foundation. The word struck me. I had built houses my whole life, pouring foundations that could last generations. Now, I was building another kind, one made of paper, signatures, and testimony. A foundation strong enough to bury Daniel alive. I walked out of Jennings's office into the late afternoon sun, the folder tucked under my arm. The town bustled around me, but all I heard was the steady drum of my own heartbeat. Still, I needed more. More than bruises and blurry photographs. I needed to see what Julia and Daniel were doing right now, in the days they thought I was gone. The first night home, I sat in my study, the house too quiet around me, and wrote a list at the top of a yellow notepad. Where are Julia and Daniel? Have they contacted the cruise line? The authorities? Life insurance? Any recent changes? Bank accounts, property, debts. Clara, where is she in all this? The questions stared back at me like unfinished beams on a job site. The next morning, I called Jennings again. Can you check if Julia or Daniel have been in contact with the insurance company? Margaret and I took out a policy years ago, modest, but enough to help Julia if something ever happened to me. Jennings hesitated. You think they? I don't think, I said. I know. By the afternoon, he called back with a clipped tone. The policy was updated 6 months ago. Beneficiary, Julia, but Daniel is listed as secondary. Premiums increased, payout doubled. That wasn't your doing, Charles. My grip on the receiver tightened until my knuckles ached. Daniel's fingerprints. Right there in black and white. But I wasn't finished. I drove to the cruise line's port office 2 days later, a plain building dressed up with posters of smiling families sipping cocktails on sunny decks. Inside, the clerk shifted uncomfortably as I asked about an incident aboard last week's voyage. At first, she refused, citing privacy. But when I leaned forward, letting her see the bruises dark against my throat, her expression changed. There was a report, she admitted finally. A passenger missing after the second night. A man. His family gave statements. My pulse hammered. What did they say? The clerk swallowed. That you'd been drinking. That you stumbled over the rail after dinner. That there was nothing anyone could do. I thanked her with a stiff smile, but inside, my stomach turned. Drinking. Stumbling. That was Daniel's alibi, one he'd rehearsed before the shove. Julia must have repeated it. Back in my truck, I sat with the engine off, the air thick and hot, and tried to breathe past the ache in my chest. My daughter hadn't just believed him, she had helped him. That night, I pulled out Margaret's old filing box, the one she used to keep bills and letters. I dug through envelopes until I found the dusty folder labeled insurance. Inside were the original policies, all signed in my hand. Clear. Clean. Margaret and Julia, no one else. No Daniel. I laid the old papers beside Jennings's report on the new ones. Side by side, the truth gleamed like nails catching sunlight. Someone had been tampering, rewriting, inflating. Preparing. The revelations came slow but steady, like water dripping through cracks in stone. And each drop carried the same message: I had been marked for erasure long before Daniel's hands touched my back. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the documents spread across my desk, and let the silence of the house settle around me. For the first time, it wasn't the silence of grief. It was the silence of planning. Daniel wanted a clean ending. But all he had done was write the opening chapter of my revenge. The next week became a rhythm of quiet, deliberate movements. Each morning, I photographed the bruises as they shifted from purple to yellow, a slow map of pain etched across my ribs. I filed the photos in a folder marked with dates. Each evening, I wrote in my notebook, conversations, documents, every small step Daniel and Julia had taken to erase me. I checked the house deed, still in my name. I pulled my bank statements, no withdrawals I hadn't made. But something gnawed at me. If Daniel was willing to push me into the sea, he wouldn't stop at lies about alcohol or a tampered policy. He would reach for the house, the land, the heart of everything Margaret and I built. So one afternoon, I drove to the county records office. A sterile building with buzzing fluorescent lights, rows of beige filing cabinets, and clerks who barely looked up from their screens. I requested a property records search under my address. The woman behind the counter frowned as her keyboard clattered. "Funny," she said. "Your property deed's been pulled up 3 times this month." "By who?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Requests from a Daniel Mercer." "Relation?" My jaw locked. He hadn't wasted a second. I thanked her, collected the printed record, and walked out into the afternoon sun that felt colder than the sea. That night, back at my desk, I spread everything out like a crime scene: medical records, the fisherman's testimony, the insurance policy, the property request. 4 walls built from betrayal. But the worst was still to come. Because later, out of habit, I checked the voicemail on my home phone, a line I rarely used anymore. Among the usual junk and a reminder from the pharmacy, there was a new message. Julia's voice. "Dad, it's Julia. I don't even know what to say. They told me you fell. That you're gone." "I don't." A pause. Her breath caught, then steadied. Her voice hardened. "Daniel says we'll figure things out. We'll handle the house. I hope you understand. Goodbye." Click. Handle the house. Not mourn me. Not search for me. Handle the house. The word stabbed deeper than Daniel's shove ever had. I sat in the dim light of the study, clutching the phone, and memories unfolded whether I wanted them or not. Julia at 5 years old, asleep on my chest after her first nightmare, her small hand clutching my shirt. Julia at 16, crying over her first heartbreak, me making hot cocoa while Margaret braided her hair. Julia at 23, walking down the aisle in her mother's wedding dress, tears in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you, Dad." And now Julia, a grown woman, leaving a message that treated me like a broken appliance to be hauled away. I pressed my palms into my eyes, forcing back tears that threatened to spill. How had it come to this? Where had I lost her? Was it when Margaret died, leaving Julia desperate for a stronger voice to lean on? Was it Daniel, whispering poison year after year until her loyalty shifted? Or had I done it myself, by giving too much, by never letting her stumble without me there to catch her? The silence of the house pressed in. Margaret's absence filled the air like a weight. And for the first time since the cruise, I allowed myself to grieve, not for my body, not for my near death, but for the daughter who no longer saw me as a father. But grief turned quickly to resolve. If Julia couldn't see the truth on her own, then I would make her see it. Piece by piece. Paper by paper. Until Daniel's mask slipped in front of everyone, and she understood what kind of man she had let inside her life. I closed the folder on the desk, the document snapping shut like the lid of a coffin. The cruise ship returned the next day. By then, they had already declared me lost. A tragic accident, the captain's report would say. Passenger presumed drowned. I was still alive, of course, sitting in Jennings's office with bruises under my shirt and fire in my chest. We agreed on one thing: the best evidence wasn't paper, wasn't bruises, wasn't even the fisherman. It was them. Their words. Their schemes. Spoken freely, believing I was gone. So we planned. Jennings arranged for me to stay off the grid, tucked in a small apartment near the harbor. I avoided phones, avoided neighbors. I became a shadow, waiting. From the port cafe, Hidden behind a newspaper and dark glasses, I watched Julia and Daniel disembark. Julia wore black, her hair tied back, sunglasses shielding her eyes. She looked like a grieving daughter, except she wasn't one. Daniel, by contrast, looked invigorated. His arm was firm around her waist, his mouth set in a line that mimicked sorrow but carried no weight. They walked together, speaking in low tones. I slipped from my seat and followed at a careful distance. Years of job sites and quiet inspections had taught me how to move without being noticed. At the taxi stand, I caught the first fragments of their words. Julia, I still can't believe it. It feels unreal. Daniel, it's better this way. Quick. No suffering. Think of Clara, she'll be provided for now. Provided for. He meant my house. My savings. My life turned into their prize. They climbed into a taxi, and I slipped into another one, telling the driver, stay close, not too close. My pulse thudded with every turn. The cab stopped at a downtown cafe, one with glass walls and too much chrome. I slid into the corner booth near theirs, ordered black coffee I didn't touch, and let their voices float toward me. Daniel leaned across the table, his words sharp and certain. The house is first. We need it listed within a month. Market's hot, we'll get top dollar. Julia hesitated. It was his. Mom's. It feels wrong. Julia, he interrupted smoothly, placing his hand over hers. He's gone. And he would want you to move forward. Do you want Clara growing up in a half-empty old house, or in the new place we've been dreaming of? The one in Boulder, with the mountain view? I gripped the edge of the booth so tightly my knuckles whitened. Margaret's garden, my workshop, the rooms where Julia had grown up, all of it reduced to a bargaining chip for a dream house. Julia bit her lip. Clara loves that house. She'll love a pool more, Daniel countered, smirking. Trust me. Kids adapt fast. The waitress set down their plates, but neither touched the food. Daniel was already pulling out papers from a leather folder, sliding them across to Julia. I had the realtor draft these. Just sign when you're ready. We'll take care of the rest. And then, the dagger, Julia's voice, softer, uncertain, but spoken nonetheless. You really think he'd want this? Daniel's reply was ice. I think what he would have wanted doesn't matter anymore. That was it. The mask was off, right there in the middle of a crowded cafe. Words that cut deeper than the ocean's black weight ever could. And I was there to hear them. I left before they noticed me, my untouched coffee still steaming on the table. Out in the street, the noise of traffic filled my ears, but inside, silence reigned. They were already dismantling me, brick by brick, while I still breathed. But now I had what I needed, their own voices. Their own words. And soon enough, the world would hear them too. I walked slowly, my hand resting on the pocket of my jacket, the pocket where Jennings's recorder sat. The entire conversation was there. Every word. Julia's hesitation. Daniel's callous certainty. I think what he would have wanted doesn't matter anymore. It was Jennings who had insisted. Charles, don't just rely on memory. Men like Daniel will twist everything. Take this, he'd said, sliding the small device across his desk. Keep it in your pocket. Let their own words condemn them. Now it had worked. The evidence wasn't my bruises, my grief, or even the fishermen. It was their voices, plotting over lunch like I was already buried. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the recorder in front of me, replaying the conversation until the words dug grooves into my skull. Part of me wanted to storm into their house, slam the device on the table, and watch Daniel's smirk crack in front of Julia and Clara. But anger was fast, and I needed slow, careful, permanent. So I asked myself, how do you deliver justice to a man who believes he's untouchable? Police. Attempted murder, life insurance fraud, conspiracy. It was all there, but I knew how Daniel worked: charm for the jury, money for the lawyers, lies for everyone else. The risk was too high. Civil court. Possible. We could fight over the house, the money, but that would only drag Clara into years of bitterness. She'd grow up hearing lawyers argue over whether her grandfather was drunk, or whether her father-in-law was simply misunderstood. No. The best method wasn't in courtrooms or police stations. It was in the open. In daylight. Where Daniel's image, the successful, charming son-in-law, the grieving husband, would crumble in front of witnesses who couldn't unhear what they heard. I needed an audience. A stage. And then it struck me. Julia's birthday was 2 weeks away. Every year, they made it an event: friends, neighbors, colleagues gathered in their home, Daniel playing host, Julia smiling under his arm. I had already received the invitation months ago, still pinned under a magnet on my fridge. That would be the place. That would be the moment. I imagined it clearly, the living room full of laughter, glasses clinking. Daniel holding court with his stories. Julia glowing under the illusion of family. And then, my voice cutting through, the recorder playing, their own words filling the room. The silence that would follow. The faces turning. The smirk wiped from Daniel's mouth. Julia seeing, not what he told her, but what he really was. I leaned back in my chair, the plan burning bright in my mind. Daniel had chosen the ocean, cold and hidden, to kill me quietly. I would choose the stage, warm and crowded, to kill him publicly. And justice, at last, would belong to me. 2 days later, I sat in a quiet office at the police department. The walls were painted a tired gray, the kind that makes you wonder if color ever lived there at all. Across from me sat Detective Morales, a man with sharp eyes and a patient expression. Jennings had arranged the meeting, presenting the officers with the evidence so far, my medical reports, the fisherman's testimony, and most importantly, the recording. Morales listened without interrupting, his brow furrowing deeper as Daniel's voice hissed through the recorder. I think what he would have wanted doesn't matter anymore. When it ended, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. You're telling me, Morales said slowly, that your son-in-law pushed you from that cruise ship, left you for dead, and then immediately began planning to take over your estate? That's exactly what I'm telling you. My voice was calm, colder than I expected. And I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for justice. Morales leaned back, steepling his fingers. This is serious, Mr. Whitman. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. If we move too early, he'll lawyer up, spin the story, maybe even drag your daughter into perjury. But if we wait... I interrupted, my hand flat on the table. I don't want him caught in a back room. I want him caught where everyone can see him. Julia's birthday party. 2 weeks from now. He'll be there, acting the grieving son-in-law. I'll play the recording in front of the whole crowd. And when the mask drops, I want your men to walk in and cuff him. In front of her. In front of everyone. The silence stretched. For a moment, I thought he would refuse. But then Morales gave a slow nod. If you can put yourself there, and if you're willing to expose yourself publicly, we'll back you. Our officers will attend in plain clothes. We'll have the warrants signed in advance, and as soon as the evidence is heard, we move in. Not before, I said firmly. Not before, he agreed. When I walked out of the station, the spring air hit me with a sharpness that made me feel alive again. This was no longer just my burden. The law was behind me. The stage was set. That night, I sat at my desk, writing the outline of the plan in my notebook. Attend Julia's birthday quietly. Wait until the crowd is gathered, laughter at its peak. Play the recording. Let their own words echo through the room. Police move in immediately. Handcuffs in front of family, friends, colleagues. Julia sees the truth with her own eyes. I closed the notebook and laid my hand on it like a Bible. Margaret would have wanted peace, not vengeance. But peace was only possible once the poison was cut out. And 2 weeks from now, Daniel's poison would be drained in front of everyone. In the days that followed my meeting with Detective Morales, I tried to let myself breathe. 2 weeks until the party. 2 weeks until the trap would snap shut. I kept busy with small things. I tended Margaret's garden, though the weeds had overtaken her roses. I sat on the porch with coffee, listening to the wind rustle through the maple tree where she used to hang a swing for Julia. I even managed to sleep more than a few hours at a time, the nightmares of black water loosening their grip. For a moment, it almost felt like life again. Almost. Then came the phone call. It was Jennings, his voice low and deliberate. Charles, I did some digging. I wanted to be absolutely sure we weren't missing anything before the party. I looked at the insurance documents again. What about them? I asked, my chest tightening. The beneficiary change. The premium increase. Those weren't filed by Daniel alone. Julia signed them too. Not once. Twice. I sat frozen, the mug in my hand turning cold. You're certain? As certain as ink and paper can be, Jennings replied. Daniel may have pushed you overboard, but Julia helped build the stage. She wasn't just complicit. She was a partner. The room tilted around me. I set the mug down before it shattered on the floor. Julia's voice echoed in my head, Dad, we'll handle the house. I had told myself she was blinded by Daniel, manipulated into repeating his words. But this wasn't blind obedience. This was choice. I hung up with Jennings, my hand trembling, and walked into Margaret's old sewing room. The sunlight cut across her empty chair, dust motes spinning in the still air. I remembered Julia as a child, sitting on the floor with fabric scraps in her lap, Margaret teaching her how to thread a needle. Patience, sweetheart. Steady hands make strong stitches. Now I saw those same steady hands signing papers that made me expendable. The betrayal sank deeper than Daniel's shove ever could. He was just a man with greed in his eyes. But Julia, she was my blood. My promise to Margaret. My only child. I sat in the dim light of Margaret's old sewing room until the shadows stretched long across the floorboards. The air smelled faintly of lavender from a sachet she'd tucked in the drawer years ago, a scent that had outlived her. For the first time since I crawled out of the sea, the weight in my chest wasn't just anger. It was resignation. Julia wasn't innocent. She hadn't been manipulated, coerced, or tricked. She had signed her name next to Daniel's, twice, when the insurance papers were changed. She had stood at his side in that cafe, nodding as he spoke about selling the house. She had already chosen. I whispered her name into the quiet, and it felt like ash on my tongue. But then I saw Clara's face in my mind. Her freckles, her laughter, the way she'd once slipped her tiny hand into mine and whispered, "Grandpa, promise you'll always be here." That was when the fog lifted. The truth sharpened into steel. Everything I was doing, the documents, the bruises photographed, the fisherman's testimony, the recording, it wasn't for me anymore. It was for her. For Clara's future. For her chance to grow up without the poison of Daniel's ambition and Julia's weakness suffocating her. I had built homes my whole life. Now I would build something else, a foundation strong enough to raise Clara on, even if I had to tear her parents away to do it. The next morning, I carried the recorder, the photographs, and Jennings's notarized statements back to the police station. Detective Morales was waiting, his sharp eyes softening when he saw the bundle under my arm. "Mr. Whitman," he said, standing to meet me. I set the folder down on his desk, heavy as a hammer. "That's everything. Medical proof. Witness statements. Audio recordings. And insurance documents showing both Daniel and Julia were in on this. You don't just have attempted murder anymore. You have conspiracy. Fraud. A scheme years in the making." Morales opened the folder, flipping through the evidence with care. "This is enough to move mountains in court," he admitted. "But you're sure you still want the arrest to happen during the birthday gathering?" "I'm sure," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. They built their lies in the open, in front of family and friends. Let their fall happen in the open too. No excuses. No shadows. Let Clara see them for who they are. His gaze lingered on me, weighing my resolve. Finally, he nodded. "Then we'll be ready. My men will blend in at the party. As soon as that recording plays, we'll move." On the drive home, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The plan wasn't about vengeance anymore. It wasn't about humiliation or payback. It was about Clara. I imagined her sitting at my kitchen table, homework spread out beside Margaret's old recipe cards. I imagined teaching her the things her parents never valued: patience, honesty, the dignity of hard work. I imagined her laughter filling the house again, not because she was bribed with toys or distracted by wealth, but because she felt safe, rooted, loved. Julia and Daniel had darkness inside them. Whether it was greed, weakness, or arrogance didn't matter anymore. They had chosen it. And for Clara's sake, I would choose the opposite. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the road stretching ahead. In 2 weeks, their masks would fall. And when the dust settled, I would raise my granddaughter myself, free of their shadows. That was my new promise, not to Margaret, not to Julia, but to Clara. The night of Julia's birthday came dressed in celebration. Their house, the very one Margaret and I had poured our lives into, glowed from the street like a lantern. Cars lined the driveway, their headlights flashing as guests laughed, carrying bottles of wine and brightly wrapped boxes. Through the tall front windows, I could see balloons bobbing, a banner strung across the living room: "Happy birthday, Julia." I stood across the street for a moment, hidden beneath the shade of a maple, my hands buried deep in my coat pockets. My heart hammered, not from fear of Daniel, not even from the police waiting inside, but from the knowledge of what was about to break. Tonight, the truth would arrive, not quietly, but like a hammer through glass. I walked up the driveway slowly, every step deliberate. The door swung open before I could knock. A neighbor I barely recognized clapped me on the back. Charles. You made it, he said, his voice warm, oblivious. I nodded, offering a tight smile, and stepped into the home that had once been mine in spirit if not in deed. The air was thick with the smell of roast beef and garlic bread, the clink of glasses, and the low hum of music from the stereo. Guests milled about in their best clothes, laughter spilling into every corner. Julia stood near the dining table, radiant in a red dress, a wineglass in her hand. She looked up, and for the briefest moment, her face faltered, shock flashing before she smoothed it into a hostess's smile. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying just enough tremor to betray her. "You're here." Daniel turned next, his practiced charm faltering for just a second. His jaw tightened, then loosened into a grin. "Charles. We thought," he stopped himself, catching the eyes of guests around them. "We thought you couldn't make it." What a surprise. I felt the recorder heavy in my pocket. My other hand brushed the inside of my jacket where Detective Morales had tucked the tiny signal device. His men were here. I spotted one by the buffet, another near the fireplace, blending in with the crowd in plain clothes. They gave no sign, but I knew they were ready. Clara saw me then. She broke from a cluster of children, her hair bouncing, freckles glowing under the chandelier light. "Grandpa," she squealed, throwing her arms around me. My chest nearly cracked under the weight of her hug. That was why I was here. That hug. That light. The evening carried on, the tension hidden under layers of laughter and clinking glasses. Daniel played host, weaving from group to group, his arms sliding around Julia's waist like a leash. She laughed in all the right places, nodded when neighbors complimented her. But I saw the way her eyes flicked toward me again and again, unease gnawing through her mask. When the cake was brought out, a towering white confection with 35 candles blazing, the guests gathered in the living room. The lights dimmed, the singing began, voices warm and cheerful. Julia blew out the flames, laughter spilling from her lips as Daniel kissed her cheek. It was then, in that perfect moment of warmth, that I stepped forward. "Before the presents," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, "I'd like to share a gift of my own." The room stilled. Dozens of faces turned toward me. Julia's smile froze, wineglass trembling in her hand. Daniel's grin faltered. I pulled the recorder from my pocket, set it on the table beside the cake, and pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, smooth and certain, "The house is first. We need it listed within a month. Market's hot, we'll get top dollar." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Julia's voice followed, hesitant but audible, it was his. "Mom's. It feels wrong." Daniel again, sharper now, "He's gone. And he would want you to move forward. Do you want Clara growing up in a half-empty old house, or in the new place we've been dreaming of?" The room seemed to shrink. Glasses paused mid-air. Neighbors stared in disbelief. And then the dagger, "I think what he would have wanted doesn't matter anymore." The silence after those words was heavier than the ocean that had nearly killed me. Julia's face drained of color. Daniel opened his mouth, scrambling for words, but before sound could leave his throat, Detective Morales stepped forward from the crowd. "Daniel Mercer," his voice rang out, strong and clear, "you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud." Two officers closed in, their badges flashing. The click of handcuffs echoed like gunfire in the hushed room. Daniel's charm cracked into rage. "This is insane. Julia, tell them. Tell them it was an accident." But Julia stood frozen, her eyes wide, her glass shattering against the floor. The crowd murmured, disbelief turning into whispers of disgust. Clara pressed closer to my side, her small hand gripping mine tight. And as they dragged Daniel out, his protests ringing hollow against the silence, I looked at my daughter, at the woman who had once clung to me for protection, now stripped bare before her own friends. Her mask was gone. His mask was gone. And justice, at last, had arrived in the middle of her birthday party. But it wasn't finished. Detective Morales stepped forward again, his gaze steady on Julia. "Julia Whitman," he said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence, "you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud." The words landed like a thunderclap. The crowd gasped. Julia staggered back, nearly toppling into the cake table, her wine-stained dress trembling with her breath. "No, no, it was him, not me," she whispered, her eyes darting wildly. I didn't know. But the officers were already moving. Morales held up a folder, the documents Jennings had provided. "We have your signatures. Twice. You weren't a bystander, Mrs. Whitman. You were a partner." The clink of the second pair of handcuffs rang sharper than the first. Julia's face crumpled, not in shame, but in disbelief that her world had collapsed in front of neighbors, friends, colleagues. Her birthday candle still smoked behind her as the officers led her toward the door. The room remained frozen, the weight of betrayal hanging like a storm cloud. Guests averted their eyes, whispers spreading in sharp threads. And then I felt it, a small tug at my hand. Clara. Her wide eyes searched mine, confusion clouding her freckles. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling, "are they really bad?" I crouched down to her level, my knees aching, my hands resting gently on her shoulders. "They made choices, Clara. Choices that hurt people. Choices that weren't fair to you, or to me." I swallowed hard, fighting the knot in my throat. "Sometimes, even people we love can lose their way." Her lip trembled. Will I lose you too?" The question cracked something inside me, but I forced my voice steady. "No, sweetheart. You won't lose me. I promise you that. I'll be here. I'll look after you, just like I once promised your grandma I would." She leaned into me then, her small arms wrapping around my neck with a desperation that broke and healed me all at once. I held her tight, feeling her heartbeat against mine, as the door slammed shut on Julia and Daniel's exit. Around us, the whispers grew louder, the guests shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to leave or to offer comfort. But I didn't care. Because in that moment, holding Clara close, I knew this was no longer just a story of betrayal or revenge. It was the beginning of something else. A new foundation, fragile but real, on which I would raise her free of the shadows that had just been dragged out into the night in chains. Family court granted me temporary custody the morning after the arrests. And 2 weeks later, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Not the suffocating silence of grief that followed Margaret's passing. Not the hollow emptiness I'd felt when Julia drifted from me. This was a gentler quiet, the kind that comes when life is mending itself, slowly, cautiously. Clara's schoolbooks were spread across the kitchen table, right where Margaret once laid out recipe cards. Her pencil scratched across the page as she worked through her math, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. Every so often, she'd glance up to ask a question, and I'd lean over, guiding her with the patience I once used to guide Julia. The house smelled of soup simmering on the stove, my attempt at reviving one of Margaret's old recipes. It wasn't perfect, but Clara had smiled when she tasted it, and that was enough. The news about Daniel and Julia was everywhere for a while. Headlines, whispers in the neighborhood, even a letter from an old colleague offering condolences in an awkward scrawl. Attempted murder. Fraud. Conspiracy. Both awaiting trial. Both stripped of freedom, of reputation, of the life they thought they could steal. Sometimes at night, I still heard Julia's voice in my head, the little girl calling me daddy, the young woman in her wedding dress. It hurt. God, it hurt. But pain is part of truth. And the truth was simple, she had chosen her path, and now she was walking it. I couldn't change that. But I could change what came next. When Clara finished her homework, she came to sit by me on the porch. The evening air carried the faint scent of Margaret's roses, some still bloomed, stubborn survivors among the weeds. Clara leaned against my shoulder, quiet for a long time. I thought then of Margaret, of the promise I had made at her bedside, I'll look after Julia. Maybe I had failed in that. But promises aren't stone, they shift, they change. And now my promise was to Clara. To raise her in truth, to shield her from the darkness her parents had chosen, to give her the foundation of love that Margaret once gave to us both. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in gold. Clara's head rested against my shoulder, her breathing soft and even. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge. Not grief. Something quieter. Peace. Bittersweet, fragile, but real.
Greetings, and thanks for spending your time with us today. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. I want to wish you a peaceful day or a restful evening, wherever you may be. Take care, and we'll see you next time.